This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. I want to begin our program today by thanking our generous donors who have contributed financially to the work of Jude 3 in the PCA, which sponsors this podcast. Your contributions enable us to curate and distribute articles relevant to the Presbyterian Church in America and which promote confessional integrity and biblical fidelity. If you are able to support the work of Jude 3, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Ruling Elder Ric Springer. Ric, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate your invitation. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you making time. So I often like to begin with, how did you come to faith? How did you come to be in the PCA?
Sure. I attended a small Bible church in my youth. My mother was the organist and the pianist. I don't know how we got to the church. She started taking us there. We were like 5 years old. And I came to the Lord at about the age of 15, joined the church. We had an itinerant evangelist that came to the church, Bob Manderson and his wife, Rita. They were boardwalk entertainers. I grew up in Wildwood, New Jersey, which is where the boardwalk is wild and woolly back in those days. And the verse that spoke to me was, "What should it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and yet lose his own soul?" I don't know why that spoke to me as a 15-year-old, but that's what the Lord used to get a hold of me. So I came to know the Lord then. That church eventually became part of the Bible Presbyterian Church. And that's how I ended up in the PCA. I went to Shelton College, which was the official Bible Presbyterian college. And there I met my wife. And we were married in 1966. And we'll be celebrating our anniversary in actually just a few days. So I came to the Lord by the evangelist, and also because the pastor was an excellent Bible teacher. Gave me a tremendous background in Old Testament, especially. I really appreciated all of those years at what's known as Faith Bible Presbyterian Chapel back in the day. My wife and I, we were sitting just after we were married. We were sitting and reading the newspaper. You remember the newspaper? The big thing that yes, exactly. And she came across an advertisement for this church that had an evening worship service. We were shocked. And so we immediately started going there, Calvary Presbyterian Church in Brick. And they were in the RPCES. And so we joined. We started going there in 1972. We joined in 1972. I was ordained in 1977. I started teaching the adult Sunday school class in 1974. And so, the Lord just calls you to do these things. And we were blessed by God to be in that church until just recently when we moved to another city here in New Jersey. But we thank God for his blessings to us as a family, for calling me as an elder. I did not seek to be an elder, but the Lord sought me. The congregation recognized the gifts that God had given me, and I was ordained in 1977. And the RPCES, as you know, joined the PCA in 1982. And that's I'm sorry.
So you were ordained RPCES and then came in with JNR in 82.
We were joined and received.
Was there a big learning curve, or I've wondered, what was it like to live through that, where you have, 1981, you have one book of order, 1982, you have, July 1st, you have a completely different book of order.
Right. Well, I was the stated clerk for Calvary Church while we were in the RPCES, and the book of church order was not that different when we went into the PCA. The work at Presbytery was essentially the same, so it wasn't a big cultural change for us. I don't know what else to say there. It was a smooth and easy transition for us, and I was the recording clerk. I was the one who dragged a computer. Was a lunchbox computer, a radio lunchbox computer using WordPerfect. So I was there and started taking minutes, and so I became the recording clerk, and eventually now the stated clerk. I was elected the recording clerk. Oh goodness, uh, 1980. It was while we were still in the RPCES.
Yes.
So
So you've been serving the church since the very beginning. Well, even your mother was a pianist, so you've had
uh,
a life of service to the church. You in your family. Um, what was your career?
I was in education. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a master's degree in urban education.
Wow.
And I spent 33 years starting in the classroom teaching science and then going into administration. And I introduced computers to schools back in the late 70s, early 80s. They were not exactly the computers we have today.
Yes.
We fought the
Indeed
big
not.
battle between those who wanted the Macs and those who wanted the PCs. And but we were able to, the Lord just blessed me in so many ways of
Mm.
giving me a job that I enjoyed going to work every day. And he just blessed in every way. I enjoyed my work in the education field. I'm glad I'm not in it anymore. Things have changed a lot, but
Yeah.
I was able to put in a lot of computer labs and bail out a few school districts. With one school district I went to work in could not print report cards. They had to write everything out. Imagine writing everything out. And so I repaired their computer systems, and they were happy to have me there. So,
I bet they were. I remember my first report cards. They were handwritten,
yeah.
but that was a little while ago. So, how did you? I know you said that God pursued you into the ministry as an elder, but what prompted you to get involved at the Presbytery and now the General Assembly level?
Right. Well, I attended the 1982 General Assembly where the joining and receiving happened. And it was not as large a group, of course, as it is now. The RPCES was a small group that we met at the same time. The PCA was a small group. And so a bunch of us essentially ended up handing out papers. That's what it boils down to. There were no floor clerks. There was no real organization as to how the thing was supposed to work. And Paul Gilchrist, Dr. Gilchrist, who was the stated clerk for the RPCES and became the stated clerk in the PCA, he was elected as stated clerk, asked Jim Smith. Jim was my stated clerk in New Jersey, and he was a pastor of a small congregation, independent congregation here for 50 years, and served as stated clerk here in New Jersey for almost 50 years. So he was around a long time. But he and Paul went to seminary together. So he had approached Jim and asked Jim if he would organize some floor clerks before we weren't really calling them floor clerks at that point. And so Jim began to organize them. And of course, he brought me along because I was his recording clerk. I remember when we met in Philadelphia. What was that, 1986? When we met in Philadelphia, we met in the Academy of Music. Huge long aisles that men had to sit in. No, nice chairs to move around. Huge long aisles, and counting the votes was excruciating.
I bet. I bet.
The men who were counting votes had to come to me. I was up on one of the balconies with a calculator, and we had to add them up on a calculator. You can imagine how long it took to count the yeses and then the noes and then the abstentions and to report that all down to the stage. Sorry.
And then keeping the same group. Now if you blink, sometimes you can miss a vote.
Oh,
So
yes.
we can get it down to 10 seconds sometimes. It
Yes,
seems like,
exactly.
whereas then it could be 10 minutes of voting, and
Oh,
who's
15,
in the hall and oh wow,
15 or 20. Yes. We
wow,
didn't go out and look for anybody in the hall.
yeah,
And as I say, there were no floor clerks then. It was just volunteers to help us out. When we met in La Mirada, California, Johnny Erickson Tata was there. She's a friend of my family. My wife's cousin was our caregiver for our first number of years. Nonetheless, that's not important. But that year, I had to run the reel-to-reel tape recorder. We used to record the assemblies on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and the person who was assigned to do it didn't show up.
huh.
And so I was the reel-to-reel tape recorder guy for that particular. So it was just a bunch of volunteers in the early days. There was an older engineer from Florida, Texas, that used to bring the microphones in his car and the wires, and he would place the microphones out on the floor and run the wires and put the tape on the wires and that sort of thing. And it was all volunteer. We didn't have any hired companies as we do now. And so the volunteers were important. Walter Lastavecca was the timekeeper. If anybody remembers Walter, for years and years, he sat up on the front desk with a series of light bulbs, called it light bulbs, and he would light up the green or red or yellow bulbs. That was also designed by that engineer from Texas that brought the microphone. So we started out as volunteers, and eventually it became more organized into floor clerks, and we began calling them floor clerks. And Jim was the chairman, I was the co-chair for a number of years, and those are the wild and woolly days of the assembly. It has grown tremendously now. Of course, we can't do it without the companies that bring their expertise.
Right. Well, so how many years have you served as the chairman of Floor Clerks?
Well, that's a good question. I'm sure it's 10 years. I haven't kept track of that. Jim was the chairman. And then I was the co-chair for a number of years. And then Jim was hard of hearing. He had hearing aids, and it was very, very difficult for him to keep track of what was happening in Presbytery and what was happening in the General Assembly. Nonetheless, we encouraged him to continue to come. The folks at the Assembly, the Administrative Committee provided a room for him. So he was helpful, but he was not running the show as much as he used to. And
Sure.
But we didn't want to. He eventually got to the point where he's unable to travel anymore, and so I became the chair of the floor clerks. Actually, co-chair again, because Dr. Tom Taylor, was also the co-chair with me for those years. Tom and I ran the floor business for a number of years, and Jim assisted, and now we're transitioning to a new way of doing things.
What are some of your favorite memories over the years? I know you shared some of them, but as chairman of Floor Clerks, or just witnessing the assembly from a different perspective than those of us sitting there
Yes.
on the uncomfortable chairs.
Hey, that's right. They are uncomfortable chairs. One of the nice things, I get a nice chair to sit in.
But you're not sitting very often. Every time I see you, you're up there directing.
No, you're right. I'm sitting a little more frequently at my age than I was in the earlier years. But we have at least Tom and I have a completely different perspective of the General Assembly than the folks who are doing the voting, the commissioners. It's hard for us to pay attention to what's happening at the General Assembly.
Right.
Back in the day, when we were printing papers and getting papers from the printer, working overnight, receiving papers, organizing papers, dividing them into groups, getting them to the various floor clerks, all of that just absorbed our attention completely. It was very difficult for us to actually monitor debates. And I didn't vote in General Assembly probably for 30 years. Simply because I was not able to listen to the debate, and I didn't want to vote without knowing what the issues were.
That's
and
right, yes.
I think Tom is the same way. I don't think he voted very much too, because the two of us were very, very involved in just trying to keep the business working. That's the important thing about the floor clerks. If there are no floor clerks doing these things, the assembly is just going to grind to a halt. So we very much appreciate all of the gentlemen and ladies who volunteered over the years to be floor clerks, to inconvenience themselves, and to hand out the paper, to count the votes. Back in the day when we had to count the votes, it was essential that we knew where every clerk was in terms of his assigned group. If he was not in the room for some reason, if something had happened and he was out in the little boys' room, we had to make sure that the votes were counted and counted correctly.
Because that could be 100 votes that just don't get counted, if you've got a 10 by 10 section of chairs.
Yes, and we were always concerned that the votes were done, counting was done correctly. Back in those days, we had a visitor section, so the ladies and other folks who were visitors and not voting commissioners would have to sit in a different section, and we did not have people assigned to count those areas. But some men would sit back there or along the sides, and we'd have to ask them to move up in order to be able to count them. It was very difficult. We started with an adding machine, as you know. They would all come up to me, and then Tom took half the room as we divided the assembly hall up. And then I eventually developed an Excel spreadsheet, which I was using. And then we were able, as Microsoft grew, so did we. We were able to share the spreadsheet. And so we could record the votes on a spreadsheet, print out the spreadsheet, and take it up to the front desk, which was much, much more efficient than the old way. But we were so happy to see the electronic voting. We were sure that it was a lot more accurate. It took a little time to get started. People were, I think, rightfully suspicious of it.
Yes.
Everybody wants to know their vote counts. That's certainly a reasonable thing. So it took us a while to test it and to prove it and to make sure that it was working. But it has made the function of the floor clerks much less, let's call it exciting, much less nerve-wracking.
Yes, and clerks do not want excitement.
No, clerks do not want excitement.
It just gets complicated that way.
That's exactly right. And now, of course, we are not printing as much paper.
Right.
About 8 years ago, they decided they were going to start putting things on the web page or on their the
share file.
Thank you. I couldn't come up with the word, the share file.
Dropbox. There's a couple.
Exactly, all that sort of thing. And that was there was a lot of resistance to that, as you can well imagine, because 10 years ago, life was different in the electronic world. It was different 9 years ago. It was different 8 years ago. It keeps evolving. So it has become more useful now. Commissioners on the floor realize, wow, it's a lot easier to do this on my tablet or whatever. The biggest problem there, of course, is we don't run the internet. It depends on the hotel or the convention center that we're in to make sure that their internet is up running and can handle all of the devices.
1,500, 2,000 devices.
Absolutely. There have been,
easily.
Well, more than that, because telephones and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, everybody's tablet and phone and computer.
And the men are watching, can you believe this? The men are watching the assembly on the live stream.
No way.
Sitting there watching it, which of course uses a tremendous amount of bandwidth.
Oh my.
There I am. We'd have to ask people, please do not watch on the live stream. It's right up there.
Just look around you. Oh, that's classic.
So that was and there was one convention center that we were in. I won't say which one because somebody may be listening. We had to actually go out and buy parts for them in order for them to get the internet connected to the way we wanted the service to work.
Oh wow!
It was just crazy. But
had to run out to Staples and get the old Ethernet cable.
Huh? More than Staples. Back in those days, we had computer stores you could go to and buy parts and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yes, the assembly has changed over the years, and by the grace of God, the numbers of individuals that are coming, more than 2,000 commissioners this year. And that's not the largest assembly that we have had. There have been larger assemblies, more than 2,000 men. And we used to waste reams. I would venture to say many thousands of pounds of paper. You print it all because you don't know how many you're going to need. And if it's a 10 or 15 page report that you've printed 1,300 copies of, that's a lot of paper.
Yes.
And so at the end of the assembly, we tried to keep track of how much paper we were not using, and tried to reduce that. And so this year we printed hardly any paper, just the very few reports that were done during the assembly.
Right.
And then not as many. And we didn't print the attendance report, for example, which is a huge report. listing all the
Oh,
presbyteries, all the men and all that sort of thing. And very few men actually came up to pick one of those up. So we stopped printing that. So the assembly has changed considerably, and men are much more comfortable now with the electronic component of the paperwork or the reports and the voting.
Yeah.
It's all falling into place, and
yeah.
that has resulted in much less work for the floor clerks.
Hmm.
We used to have 55 or 60 floor clerks to cover the assembly hall. We can do it now with 25 or 30
Hmm.
because they don't need to be in place to count votes. And if we always have a backup plan, incidentally, to count votes manually, so everybody, but they have bigger sections that they would have to count. But we always have a backup plan in the event that something happens. But the stress on the floor clerks it's much less, and the stress on the chairs, the co-chairs of the floor clerks, is much reduced. You may remember a few years ago, we were trying to eliminate using paper at the microphones for writing out motions.
Yes.
And anytime you write a motion, you've got to write it out, and somebody has to come down and pick it up. So we announced, please, you can email them. Well, we didn't have any address to email them to. So I suggested to Dr. Taylor, Roy Taylor, that they could just use my address. Just email them to me, and I'll get them, and we'll print them out and take care of it. So after it was over, I remember he stood, or with the moderator stood at the microphone and announced my personal email address to the world.
Oh.
So, but it is the way it is, and who knows who has my email address now? But it's
everyone.
been a joy. It's been an actual. I can't tell you how blessed I have been to be able to do those things for the General Assembly.
Oh, and the assembly has been blessed by you, I know. So when the assembly was printing things, did they just rent a big old truck size copy machine, room size copier?
We always had 3 large copy machines, one up in the stated clerk's office and 2 at the on the floor, but behind a curtain, not on the floor available to the assembly. In addition, we still had to send work out to printers, and we had contracts with them. We would deliver them paperwork by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they would have to have it back to us by 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
I keep hitting this. Large reports that
like the review of Presbytery records or overtures.
Yes, all the large reports went out as much as we could have available to them before the assembly started. They would have that, and then at 7 o'clock every morning, I would be at the door receiving the paperwork, boxes and boxes, and there were gentlemen who volunteered to help me, get up at 7 in the morning. Who expects, as a commissioner, to have to get up at 7 in the morning and be down there to pick up papers?
Wow. Well, and you must have had to have a U-Haul. I mean, a huge truck.
We used hand trucks.
Okay.
And we stole hand trucks. We gave them back, obviously, but we I should say borrowed hand trucks from the
convention center or
hotel. Oh no, we couldn't use them from the convention or the bookstore.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
From the bookstore and other exhibitors that would loan us hand trucks. But now they've broken down and bought us our own hand truck, even though we now have less paper.
Well, better late than never, I guess. Wow. So when the rest of us are debating, y'all are working, so you can't follow a lot of the debate.
Very difficult. Now the floor clerks can, of course.
Oh yes.
We want them to vote. We want them to be able. So we permit them on the floor as much as we can, and only call them up when it's actually time for them to do something. Mm-hmm. And once the reports have been given out, they'll give out 2 or 3 reports. Then they can sit down for a while. Our biggest issue then is protests and negative votes. And you've seen the lines. We always have tables. Tom and I, Tom Taylor, Dr. Taylor, make sure that we have negative vote forms and protest forms out and ready to go, because you can't jump up when somebody says, I want to record my negative vote, and start looking for the paper and putting it out. So we have those things ready. We have the men.
And you've got to know which vote they're recording their negative for, because they might on 2 or 3 per assembly. So it's not just like you got a blank piece of paper, sign your name on it.
That's correct. We have to fill in a certain number of the sheets, and the rest of them we just attach to it.
Oh, okay.
And give those sheets to the recording clerks up on the stage. We do keep one sheet at one desk. Usually it was my desk, that other men could come up, because later on somebody's going to come up and say, I want to sign that protest or that negative vote or whatever. So during that time, Tom and I are walking up and down the line of men, reminding them that they have to print their name and sign their name and write their presbytery. I feel like I have said that 1,000 times. But as I told them, if we can't read your name, you're wasting your time. If we don't know who you are, then we can't record your negative vote or protest or whatever.
Yeah. Yes. So have you noticed an increase or a decrease in the amount of recorded votes or protests over the years? I only go back, I think this year was my 11th year of ordination. So
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. So I only go back about 12 or 13 years, because I did attend before just to watch. But has it changed, or has it pretty much always been, it'd be 2 or 3 negative votes recorded, maybe 1, maybe 0 protests?
Yeah, they're not always, of course, protests and negative votes, but most of the assemblies have had at least some. I would say that it's down. It's not as frequent as it used to be.
Okay, good.
But there are always some large issues.
Yeah.
The debate on creation, the debate on federal vision, the debate on the insider movement, if you recall that one, where it doesn't matter what it says in the Bible. We don't want to offend anybody, so don't say Jesus is the Lord. I shouldn't do that. I'm characterizing them, and I should not be characterizing the folks. But at any rate, when those kinds of things happen, you can always expect that there will be negative votes recorded, or somebody will want to come up and write something, And so for the most part, there have not been a tremendous. There have not been into the thousands of men who have come up to sign things, as there has in the past on some of those bigger issues.
Yes. I remember signing one. I think it was when Calvary Presbytery was, their response was not acceptable on forbidding a man to teach his difference. I think, so it's not just one side of the PCA that signs them.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
depends on which way the vote goes.
That's right. That's exactly right.
But I wanted to get your take on this as a clerk of Presbytery and as chairman of Floor Clerks, so the one who has to do all the work when we want to protest. But it seems to me that protests and negative votes are a good way to give a minority a way to express their views, to express their concerns, but then allow us to move forward with unity. That here the matter shall end.
Exactly.
We can respond. It brings. We don't have to keep fighting this.
Exactly, and that's exactly what does happen. Once the signatures are there, once they've been given to the recording clerks, the assembly has moved on. Business has moved on. So it does serve the purpose. And I don't think anyone objects to it. They all want to have the freedom to express their opinion for an issue that they felt was worthy of their discussion and attention. So we don't encourage it, but we make it as easy as possible for the men to do that, to write a protest or to cast a negative vote.
Yeah, satisfy their conscience. We've had matters in session that it's just gone round and round and round, and it's just, well, you know what, Elder so and so has made a dissent. It's on the record. Let's move on. We don't need to keep renewing motions, and so our polity is designed for that, so that we can satisfy conscience, continue together in unity, and move on with the greater work of the kingdom.
Exactly, and that not to give myself any acclamation on this, but it's the reason you need floor clerks. It's the reason that you need the tables available to do those kinds of things, because you don't want business to stop.
Right.
You want business to continue to go. So we are so thankful for the men and women who have served as floor clerks over the years, and some of the big names in the PCA that would be recognized by many have served as floor clerks, have been
Wow.
willing to serve as floor clerks and to make themselves a little uncomfortable, and so we appreciate every one of them.
Yeah, I'm impressed by some of the people I've seen, serving as clerks, because it even now, with it being, it sounds like a lot less work than it was earlier. It still is a lot of work, and um, Presbytery.
We ask them to be early for every time we have a session. Sign in every time they have a session, because if we don't know who's there, we're we're really in trouble.
Yeah.
So yes, they have to be there a little early. They have to sign in. If they can't be there for some reason, they have to make arrangements with us to have one of the other men or women cover theirs. So there is responsibility, and it does, in a sense, interrupt their time at the General Assembly.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the men during the assembly, can take a few minutes to go into the exhibit hall or do some, not so much the floor clerks, and so they do inconvenience themselves, and we appreciate their work.
Yes, yes. Well, what have been some of the most significant moments in PCA history that you've witnessed? Maybe some crucial debates. You mentioned the creation or
Yeah,
federal vision. Or what looking back on your time since joining and receiving, what would you say have been, this was a crucial moment?
oh boy. Well, the insider movement was a big discussion. I think the creation movement and the federal vision, the three that I mentioned. And the NEA membership.
Oh, yes.
Whether or not we should continue in the NEA, that was a big. I would say that was a turning point, at least for some. The side who thinks we should have stayed in it was a turning point for them. The side who thinks we should have left it was a turning point for them. So either way, it made a change to our polity. And it may change again if we, if the assembly. The wonderful part about the assembly is the 14th assembly can't bind the minds of the 15th assembly.
Right, right.
The 15th assembly, or just pick a number, 50th or the 51st now, meets and does something to change what another assembly did. Which is why it's important for the commissioners all to be there.
Mm-hmm.
If you think things should be functioning in a certain way, then it's up to you to be there, and you should pardon me for saying this, and not be out at the ball game while the assembly is. I don't mean to pick on anybody.
Well, I think this last year, though, we saw some very close votes, and there were a lot of guys in the hallways or down at Moe's or Chili's or
Exactly.
Texas Day Brazil, and had they been there, things may have gone differently, may have gone the same way. I don't know.
That's exactly right. And of course, the men that come with their families, they have some responsibilities to their families, and so they step out in the hall to talk with their wife, or see the kids, or whatever. There are reasons that men are not in the hall, but you are exactly correct that when votes are very close, it's important for you to be there to vote, because you never know which way things are going to go. Now, obviously, some votes are overwhelmingly positive or negative, but most votes are not, and that's the reason we vote. When it comes down, somebody calls for a division to the House, and because you can't tell just by raising the cards, we used to raise those blue cards, that they gave you, and we used to have to. At one point, and I'm sorry if I'm reminiscing a little bit here, the floor clerks.
That's what we're here for. We're here for the reminiscence.
Yeah, the floor clerks would walk down the aisles when we were counting a vote and collect the blue cards, or your voting card, and count the voting cards, and then hand them back to them, and then go to the next row, because it got difficult to see who was holding up a hand. So they agreed that we would vote by voting cards. So we would have the people pass the voting cards down to the end of the aisle. The clerk would count them, write down the number, give them back. So we were sure, that we were getting an accurate count. And And it takes time.
And I remember guys would go to the mic, usually the same 2 or 3 guys, and say, "Would Mr. Moderator, would you remind the assembly that you can't vote with your copy of By Faith? You have to vote with your voting card." And now I know why they did that. I thought they were just being pedantic. It was because of that history that those voting cards were counted that way.
That's exactly right.
I broke into a cold sweat last year, or this past assembly, because I got my bag with all of the and it had the voting card in there, and I goodies, and I wanted to be lighter and more agile, so I took everything out of it except for the voting machine,
Sure.
and then I think I had a binder because I had a few things printed off for debate. Well, so I took the voting card out. Well, the first night this past year, the voting machines weren't working.
That's right.
But thankfully, our most wise moderator decided we would vote by standing, so I wasn't disenfranchised.
We did talk to the moderator. I suggested to him that we could count the votes if they would hold up their voting device. We would know that they were a commissioner if they would hold up. That was the best we could do because we weren't sure who had voting cards and who didn't because we haven't used them for a few years. So it's always
that was a brilliant suggestion.
Yes, well,
as one who would have otherwise been disenfranchised.
That's right.
So thank you. So you're not always watching the debate or following the debate, able to. But have there been other instances where there's been some division, but then followed by charity, unity, grace that just erupts, that demonstrates what
there
we
have
are
been times when the assembly has paused to pray. And the moderator has called on men across the room to come to a microphone and to pray. And those have been wonderful times. There was a time when one of our, a person from one of our offices, it wasn't a commissioner, but an employee of the PCA, had a heart attack. And it was more than 10 years ago, so you weren't there. But the assembly paused clearly to pray for him and for his wife. And so there are moments like that when the assembly is aware that they are, in a sense, the church.
Right.
They are not just there as a business meeting. There's a worship component, not just during the worship services, but also as we are meeting as ordained men. Ordained, may I say, ministers, even ruling elders are in the sense.
Our ministers, our pastors.
And so it's always good to see men, and I've seen many times small groups of men over in a corner praying for one another. I don't know what they're praying for. I don't go over and barge in, but there is always a sense during the assembly that we are there as the servants of God, and it has just been my great pleasure and blessing to be part of that assembly. It's interesting. My wife and I have traveled extensively in the United States and out of the United States, but in the United States, and we would always, while we were traveling, try to find a PCA church to visit. We carried our little book, but now we can do it on the phone, and almost invariably we would go into a church and people would shake hands. We go and sit down, and someone would come up. Don't I know you from the General Assembly? My wife used to get a big kick out of it.
I bet.
Don't I know you from the General Assembly?
Well, if you're ever down in Chattanooga, come worship with us at First Pres.
We took the Chattanooga choo-choo while we were there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they've just remodeled, or they are. I think they are remodeling. Got to get the verb tense there.
Yes.
The active indicative.
Was when the assembly was there. We were there. I think twice we've been to Chattanooga, as I recall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then this year, this coming year, will you be at General Assembly this year?
I'm not sure. It really depends. My wife and I are 80, and it's not as easy to travel. We used to fly a lot, but flying is just too difficult now. It's standing in line and all the rigmarole to get on the plane. Yeah. So we've been driving, and driving is not as easy as it used to be.
No, and flying to Chattanooga is not easy either.
No, you can't get there from here.
No, you may. I don't even know if you could go into Philadelphia. I don't know how close you are to Philadelphia. I don't know if we have a
Philadelphia or
direct
Newark. We usually fly out of Newark.
Okay. Yeah. So, what is the transition plan? You're the floor clerk chairman emeritus? Is that what your official title is now?
I don't think it really is a title. I think they made it up. I appreciate it. That was
Well, just like I'm a laird in Scotland, right?
there you go. There you go. I appreciated Dr. Chappell doing that. Essentially, they all knew that I was planning on this being my last year as floor clerk. We have done the transition. Tom Stein, Pastor Stein, is taking over the function of the floor clerk. Tom Taylor and I are retiring from doing the floor clerk. We've done it for a number of years, and we think, first of all, we're getting to an age where it's difficult to do it. But it's also the function of floor clerks is a lot more simple than it used to be. When I first started working, volunteering for the General Assembly, as I said, it was all volunteers. And I would come the weekend before the assembly, and all of the volunteers would work through me to get information to the state of clerk. What do we want to happen? So everybody you would all hear people all over the place going, Rick. And I had a walkie-talkie, and they all had walkie-talkies, and so the culture sort of developed that I was there as the liaison. Paul Gilchrist and Ross, I forget his name now, who was the finance guy back then, depended on me, so they wouldn't be bothered with these questions. So as we hired these various companies, the companies sort of worked with me as well. But then we had floor planning individuals that were hired who did an excellent job. Sherry Eschenberg, Amanda Burton, and now it's Angela Nance. They plan everything, and they're really in charge of everything. So now, instead of being the point contact person, I still am a little bit, but I work for them now. I don't do anything without checking with them, making sure that there was a day when I had to tell people where the organ went, where the piano went, where the microphones went, and all those sorts of things. But so the floor clerks don't do any of that stuff because there's no need to do it. There's a floor planner. There are the companies now that have been doing it. So the function is much more easy to work, much more easy to plan. It is not so much planning. You don't need so many people to have the 60 or number of people to try to organize, like herding cats and that sort of thing. And so the job has changed over time as the assembly has changed over time. Many more people now. And we have to meet in places that can accommodate almost 3,000 people for a worship service. As a matter of fact, it was more than 3,000 people for the worship service this year. And food venues and hotels, and so we just can't go to any small town and expect to hold the General Assembly. So it's a huge operation from that perspective, and I thank God the floor clerks are a small part of it and keeping the wheels greased, as it were.
Yes, and the track on the rails, and that's one of the things I've heard about the trouble that the administrative committee in Lawrenceville has finding a city, because the General Assembly has outgrown many mid-sized cities,
Absolutely.
but we're not quite big enough for major, large cities like New York or Charlotte necessarily.
Sure.
So there's the Goldilocks. It's harder to find that Goldilocks list of cities.
Yes, some years ago, I don't know if you remember Jimmy Lyons. You may not. A Southern pastor, Jimmy Lyons, they called him. He stood up one year in the assembly and was right in doing so. Mr. Moderator, I object to the cost of the General Assembly. Well, the point was, it's so expensive for a small church to send a pastor to pay for a hotel, to pay for food, to pay for travel, to pay for the registration fee. It's expensive for small churches to send people to the General Assembly. And so to meet in New York, imagine how expensive it would be to meet in New York. It was expensive enough to meet in Philadelphia. I don't think they'll ever go back. Um,
And the Pittsburgh Assembly bankrupted the AC, is what I heard when I was in seminary a
yeah,
decade and a half ago.
yes. The assembly is expensive. We want to encourage every church to participate, to donate to the administrative committee. Every presbytery should donate to the administrative committee. It's an important work of the entire church, not just the big churches with all the money, but all the churches need to participate in the work of the PCA, the work of the General Assembly. It is not only it is the Church of Jesus Christ. It's not the only church, obviously, but it is the Church of Jesus Christ. And we have been asked to shepherd those hundreds of thousands of people that are in our pews, and we all need to contribute to the cost of the assembly. It is not inexpensive. It is not an insignificant figure to run a General Assembly. As the local arrangements committees find out, and, all of a sudden it's their turn to do it, and they say, "Wow!" They have to start raising money years in advance.
Yeah, and I know that they have staff that try to reduce the cost of it with advertising and exhibits, but still, it's it's 50 or 100 grand just to sign a contract to get a space on the calendar, and that hasn't got you a single chair.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes, all the exhibitors contribute, and so that is a big help to the assembly, running the assembly. And there are also private contributors that help with the General Assembly, but it's a big cost, and there has been a debate over the years as to whether or not we should have a delegated General Assembly. So that only a certain number of pastors could go each year. And every time I hear that debate, I chuckle to myself and I say, well, if you're a ruling elder, it is a delegated assembly. You can only send so many ruling elders from a church, whereas all teaching elders.
Yeah, we might approach parity if it were a delegated assembly, if it were six ruling elders and 3 teaching elders from each presbytery, or 6 of each. I don't do math anymore.
Oh, that's okay. Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Yes. Yeah. It would be 6 ruling elders and 3 teaching elders from each presbytery.
Right.
But so, how do you assess the health of the PCA currently?
Oh boy, I think the PCA is wonderfully healthy. I think the PCA, we are planting churches. It's out of control. It's within God's control. We are planting churches. We are reaching out to ethnic communities, which I think is tremendously important. One way to look at it is the Lord has provided for us all of these folks who have come across the border. We need to be reaching out to the people that God provides for us. I'm not speaking for or against either candidate or whatever. I'm simply saying.
But the nations are coming to us.
The world is coming to us, absolutely. And there are many. Look at all the Muslim community that now resides in the United States. It is a mission field like it has never been before.
Yes.
And the PCA is working at planting churches in those kinds of ethnic communities, and I think the Lord is blessing that. And the gates of hell will not prevail against the Church of Jesus Christ. And we are a small part of that church. And I think the Lord is blessing us, and we are growing. It's not so important what the numbers are. It's so important how we are reaching the communities around us.
Yes. I remember when I was in Jackson, Mississippi, a town many people think, well, no one goes there, but they had an internationals outreach at First Pres Jackson that, you would have Chinese students, Muslim students from all over the Middle East coming to Jackson to study. And then they would come to First Pres Jackson on, I think it was Thursday nights, to learn English, but to learn English from Christians. And I had conversations with a couple of Chinese scholars there from mainland China, and they said, what is this Bible? There's the old Bible and the new Bible. What is that? And just with no understanding, but also no prejudice either way, no bias. They were just interested.
Most of the folks do not have a prejudice. They are willing to listen and willing to. I go to a church in Glassboro, New Jersey. It's a small town in southern Jersey. We are near Philadelphia, and Glassboro is the host to a college, Rowan University. It used to be a state school. Now it's a Rowan University. It's still a state university. With 24,000 people. Now it's not huge, but it's a good sized school.
It's a big school.
We have an RUF component from our church working at Rowan University. We have kids from Rowan University coming to our worship services. We're a small church of 120 or 30 on a Sunday, so not a huge church, but we have a lot of kids from Rowan University. They are from India, they are from Pakistan, they are from Japan, they are from all over the place. And they're coming and they're hearing the gospel. Many of them have made professions of faith. A few of them have been baptized. It's wonderful. And so, even a small church like ours can have an impact in a community like a university through RUF and the various just inviting people to church and that sort of thing. So when you look at what's happening across the country, I think the PCA can have a significant impact for Jesus in saving souls, spreading the news of the gospel, spreading the good news.
Well said. Well, what would you like to see? Where would you like to see the PCA in 25 years? We've just looked back at the last 50 at the previous assembly, and what would you like us to be celebrating at our 75th anniversary?
Well, exactly what I just said. I would like to see the PCA planting more and more churches in ethnic communities, and the whole face of the General Assembly, by the grace of God, will change in the next 25 years.
We'll look more like Revelation 7.
Absolutely. More and more people from various communities. It's already changing. If you look at it over the past 50 years, it's already changed significantly. And there are more different folks. It's not just the middle class white guy anymore.
From the South.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. I'm prejudiced because the RPCES, we were kind of in the Northeast.
Right. Yes.
So we're happy to join our brothers from the South.
Yes. Well, Rick, this has been very encouraging to me. Thank you for your time and your ministry at the General Assembly.
It's been my pleasure. The Lord has blessed me with, I have the best wife in the world. I'm sorry, the rest of you guys. He gave me the best wife in the world. I have wonderful children and grandchildren, but most especially, I thank God for the church that he sent me to, Calvary Presbyterian Church, where we spent almost 50 years there with my family, and my being able to be part of the Presbytery here in New Jersey and the General Assembly for all these years without seeking it. I just was brought along and was asked to do things, and then you just do them. And so God has just blessed me in tremendous ways. And I thank you for having me on this podcast to talk about it a little bit.
Oh, thank you for sharing. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. The only reason we are able to provide such content as this is because of the generous support of our listeners. And so if you are able to make a donation, and after you have faithfully supported your local church, we hope you'll consider visiting our website, jude3pca.org. There, in addition to making a donation, you can find a wide range of resources and archives aimed to promote the historic, old-school, Reformed faith within the PCA. Please join us again next week as we welcome Ruling Elder Matt Lee and Teaching Elder Mark Robinson for a discussion on racial quotas and partiality within the Presbyterian Church in America. I'll talk to you then.